I watched General Voss's hand move across the duty roster, a single stroke of red ink crossing out my name. "Captain Reeves," she said without looking up, "you're off the Intelligence Review Board. Major Callahan reads terrain better than you." She smiled then, the kind of smile that said she'd already forgotten I was standing there. I felt something in my chest go still and cold, like a machine powering down. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why 6 years of flawless mission planning suddenly meant nothing. I just nodded once and walked out of her office. 3 days later, she would come running into the operations center, face drained of color, asking why we'd marched straight into an ambush. If you've ever been erased by someone who benefited from your work, if you've watched credit flow upward while responsibility stayed with you, stay with me. What happened next wasn't revenge. It was an invoice finally coming due. I joined the 101st Airborne Operations Intelligence Division straight out of advanced training at Fort Huachuca, young enough to believe that competence created its own gravity. For 8 years, I mapped enemy positions, predicted movement patterns, and advised on terrain vulnerabilities across 4 deployments spanning Iraq and Afghanistan. I wasn't flashy. I didn't give rousing speeches or pose for photos with visiting officials. I sat in dim rooms lit by the blue glow of DCGSA terminals, cross-referencing satellite imagery from Predator feeds with elevation charts from National Geospatial Intelligence Agency databases, finding the things that would keep soldiers breathing. My toolkit was technical, but my thinking was tactical. I'd spent hundreds of hours studying Soviet military doctrine on terrain analysis, cross-referenced with insurgent adaptation patterns documented in after-action reports going back to 2003. I knew how to read dead space in valleys, how seasonal water flow altered mobility corridors, how a 3-degree slope change could mean the difference between effective cover and a kill zone. In Kandahar, during Operation Enduring Sentinel, I identified a supply route everyone else dismissed as too exposed, a wadi system that ran parallel to Highway 1 but stayed below the ridgeline where insurgent observation posts typically positioned. Using thermal imagery overlaid with historical IED placement data, I mapped a corridor that cut 3 days off a critical resupply mission to combat outpost wilderness. The route avoided an ambush that Signals Intelligence later confirmed was planned for the primary highway approach, 12 fighters with RPGs positioned in compounds we would have passed within 400 meters of. The operation succeeded, our trucks rolled in with ammunition and medical supplies that kept that outpost operational for another 6 weeks, and my commanding officer at the time, Colonel Warren, a man who actually read briefings instead of skimming executive summaries, made sure Division Command knew who'd planned it. He submitted me for a Bronze Star for meritorious service. I thought that was how things worked. When I transferred to General Voss's command 2 years ago, I carried recommendations that used words like exceptional and irreplaceable. She greeted me with a firm handshake and said the division was lucky to have me. For the first 6 months, I believed her. I rebuilt the intelligence assessment protocols from scratch, replacing a patchwork system that relied on CPOF software configurations from 2011 and manual cross-referencing that left gaps big enough to hide entire battalions. The previous analyst, a competent enough captain who'd burned out after 3 deployments, had done his best with outdated tools, but he'd been working with systems designed for a different kind of war. I spent 4 months writing new analysis algorithms in Python, integrating feeds from 7 different collection platforms, drone surveillance from MQ-9 Reapers, ground reports filed through Tiger tablets by patrol leaders, signals intelligence summaries from the NSA liaison team, pattern of life analysis from persistent surveillance balloons, local informant reports vetted through our human cell, biometric data from hide scanners at checkpoints, and historical attack databases maintained by Chiat. I built automated correlation engines that flagged anomalies, unusual cell phone activity in normally quiet sectors, changes in vehicle patterns near key infrastructure, absence of normal civilian movement that suggested locals knew something we didn't. The system generated real-time threat matrices updated every 6 hours, color-coded overlays that company commanders could access on ruggedized tablets before stepping outside the wire. When a surprise offensive nearly broke through our perimeter in Helmand Province, 3 coordinated vehicle-borne IEDs followed by a company-strength assault on forward operating base Hansen, my early warning system caught the preparation signatures 18 minutes before the first explosion. Unusual generator activity in 3 separate compounds, a suspicious absence of local nationals near the perimeter, and cell phone patterns consistent with pre-attack coordination drills. 18 minutes was the difference between alert defenders and catastrophic surprise. We had gunners in position, quick reaction forces mounted, and medevac birds already spooling up when the attack came. 5 wounded, none critical, attackers repelled with heavy losses. General Voss presented the improved intelligence capabilities at a joint command briefing. She never mentioned my name. She used the word "we" 47 times. I counted. I told myself it didn't matter. The work mattered. Soldiers came home because I was good at what I did. That was enough. That had to be enough. The promises started small. Reeves, once this deployment cycle ends, we'll talk about your next promotion. Then, 3 months later, the timing isn't quite right yet. You understand, budget constraints. I understood that captain was becoming a permanent address rather than a waypoint. My responsibilities kept expanding. I supervised 12 analysts, reviewed every major operations intelligence packet, and served as the division's primary terrain specialist. I was in the operations center before dawn and left after most officers had gone to dinner. When General Voss needed a briefing prepared for theater command, she'd drop it on my desk with a deadline that meant canceling sleep. I delivered every time. Major Callahan arrived 8 months ago, transferring in from a logistics position at Camp Leatherneck with no intelligence background and an officer evaluation report that praised his dynamic leadership style without mentioning any actual accomplishments. His previous assignment involved managing supply distribution, important work, but about as relevant to terrain analysis as a cook's experience is to flying helicopters. He had a confident voice and a way of rephrasing other people's assessments as if they were original insights. During briefings, he'd wait for me to present findings from overnight analysis, detailed breakdowns of enemy patrol patterns derived from weeks of ISR footage correlation, then build on them with observations that were just rewordings of what I'd said, but delivered with the kind of commanding presence that made generals nod. Where I'd say enemy forces demonstrate a preference for attacking during evening prayers when security posture is typically reduced, he'd say we're observing tactical exploitation of predictable cultural patterns in our defensive stance. Same information, bigger words, more confident delivery. General Voss nodded approvingly. She liked the way he spoke, clear, assertive, uncomplicated by doubt. You're so dependable, Reeves, she told me once, after I'd spent a weekend rebuilding an analysis model. I never have to worry about you. I heard what she meant, you'll do the work anyway, so why reward you for it? Lieutenant Hayes, one of my junior analysts, pulled me aside after a particularly brutal week. Captain, if you ever leave, this whole division's intelligence apparatus collapses, she said quietly. You know that, right? I smiled and told her we were all replaceable. But I filed that comment away in a part of my mind that was starting to keep different kinds of records. The meeting was scheduled 3 weeks in advance. Intelligence protocol review, the calendar invitation said. Discussion of staffing and strategic planning. I prepared a presentation on our improved threat detection rates and a proposal for expanding the analyst team. I thought, stupidly, in retrospect, that this was recognition arriving late but still arriving. General Voss's office had too much light that morning. Sun streamed through windows overlooking the base, making the oak desk gleam. She sat with perfect posture, a folder open in front of her. Major Callahan sat to her right, looking pleased in a way that made my shoulders tighten. Captain Reeves, she began, and something in her tone made me understand this wasn't going to be the conversation I'd prepared for. I've been evaluating the intelligence division's leadership structure. We need to streamline decision-making, reduce bureaucratic friction. I waited. Effective immediately, you're being removed from the Intelligence Review Board. Major Callahan will assume primary responsibility for operational terrain assessment and mission planning oversight. The words landed like something physical. Ma'am, I said carefully, may I ask what factors influenced this decision? She glanced at Callahan, and he gave her a small nod, as if granting permission. Major Callahan has demonstrated a more intuitive grasp of strategic terrain analysis, she said. He reads the battlefield more naturally. Your work is solid, Reeves, don't misunderstand, but we need someone with a broader tactical vision. Broader tactical vision. The man had been in intelligence for 8 months. I had 8 years and 4 combat deployments. I see, I said. My voice came out level, almost detached. Will I retain supervisory authority over the analyst team? For now. We'll reassess as the transition progresses. She was already looking back at her folder, the conversation over in her mind. I stood. I saluted. I walked out of that office and something in me that had held together through firefights and failed missions and bureaucratic stupidity finally fractured. Not loudly. Not visibly. It was more like a bone breaking cleanly, shocking in its suddenness, absolute in its finality. I sat at my desk and stared at the intelligence reports I'd compiled that morning using overnight collection from 3 different Reaper orbits and ground reports from 4 separate patrol elements. 16 pages of analysis on enemy troop movements near the Coast Pass, complete with annotated satellite imagery, movement vector projections, and historical attack pattern correlations. I'd flagged 3 high-risk choke points where the terrain funneled traffic into engagement areas with limited cover, and 2 potential ambush sites where compounds overlooked natural patrol routes from elevated positions with clear fields of fire out to 800 meters. The report was supposed to inform tomorrow's patrol route planning for a reinforced platoon movement to resupply 2 observation posts along the Pakistan border. It didn't matter anymore. Not to General Voss. She'd replaced me with a man whose primary qualification was sounding confident when he repeated my work. That's when I opened my email and found the message I'd been ignoring for 2 weeks. Colonel Whitmore commanded a Joint Special Operations Task Force operating out of Bagram, a multi-service unit pulling personnel from Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, and Air Force Special Tactics teams for counterterrorism operations across Regional Command East. We'd worked together briefly during my second deployment when his team needed emergency pattern-of-life analysis for a high-value target raid, and I'd pulled together an assessment in 6 hours that normally would have taken 3 days. The raid succeeded, the target was captured, and Whitmore had followed my career with the kind of attention that felt almost paternal. His email was short and direct, written in the clipped style of someone who doesn't waste words. Reeves, I'm building an intelligence team for a new multi-theater operations unit conducting strategic interdiction missions. I need someone who actually understands how to read terrain and predict enemy behavior, not just someone who can brief PowerPoint slides with confidence. Interested? Promotion to major, full authority, budget for real collection assets. Let me know. I'd archived it when it first arrived, telling myself I owed the division my loyalty. General Voss might not appreciate me, but the work mattered. The mission mattered. Sitting at my desk with my name crossed off the duty roster, I understood loyalty was supposed to flow in both directions. I'd been pouring mine into a cracked vessel, watching it drain away while telling myself the loss was noble. I replied to Colonel Whitmore that afternoon. By evening, we'd scheduled a secure call over SIPR video teleconference. By midnight, I had a formal offer transmitted through encrypted channels, promotion to major, leadership of a 6-person intelligence cell with direct access to national-level collection platforms, and a mandate to build analysis protocols for cross-theater operations spanning Afghanistan, Pakistan, and emerging crisis zones. The kind of work I'd been trying to do in the 101st, but with leadership that valued expertise over optics and a budget that included dedicated Reaper orbits and access to compartmented intelligence streams I could only dream about in my current position. I need you here in 3 weeks, Whitmore said during our call. Can you make that work? I thought about General Voss's face when she dismissed 8 years of service with a single sentence. I thought about Major Callahan sitting in briefings, harvesting credit from my analysis. I thought about Lieutenant Hayes's quiet warning that the division's intelligence structure was held together by my competence alone. Yes, sir, I said. I can make that work. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. Not yet. I accepted the transfer orders and submitted my departure paperwork through official channels, a DA Form 4187 personnel action request and associated transfer documentation, routed directly to division personnel through the Army's electronic system without passing through General Voss's office. Army regulations didn't require me to announce my resignation in person, just file the forms through proper administrative channels and serve out my remaining duty days. I had 3 weeks of terminal leave accumulated that would cover the transition period. I spent those 3 weeks doing something I'd never done before, exactly what was asked of me and nothing more. I stopped working weekends in the Tactical Operations Center. I stopped fixing other people's sloppy analysis when junior analysts submitted reports with obvious gaps in their threat assessments. When junior analysts came to me with questions that fell outside my now diminished authority, requests for help with pattern analysis software or guidance on terrain evaluation techniques, I directed them to Major Callahan with professional courtesy. He's the primary terrain specialist now, I said pleasantly. He should be building those capabilities within his area of responsibility. Lieutenant Hayes caught on quickly. Captain, is everything okay? Everything's fine, I told her. I'm just respecting the new chain of command. On my second to last day, I received orders to report to Bagram for reassignment. General Voss found out when personnel forwarded her the standard notification. She called me into her office within an hour, the first time she'd requested my presence since removing me from the review board. You're transferring? She said it like an accusation. Yes, ma'am. I've accepted a position with Colonel Whitmore's Joint Task Force. You didn't think to discuss this with me first? I met her eyes. Ma'am, you made it clear my strategic value to this division had reached its ceiling. Colonel Whitmore offered me an opportunity to expand my capabilities. I'm grateful for the time I've served here. Her jaw tightened. This is poor timing, Captain. We have major operations planned. Major Callahan reads terrain better than I do, I said quietly. I'm sure he'll manage beautifully. I left her office for the last time and felt nothing but clean, crystalline clarity. Bagram was different from the first morning. Colonel Whitmore's task force operated with surgical precision, small teams, clear mandates, zero tolerance for bureaucratic posturing. My first briefing, Whitmore introduced me to the unit as the best terrain analyst I've worked with in 23 years. He said it in front of 15 officers, including 2 other colonels. I had an office with actual windows, a team of 3 senior analysts who actually wanted to learn, and access to intelligence resources the 101st could only dream about. Within a week, I was building threat assessment models for operations spanning 3 countries. You look different, Lieutenant Hayes told me during a video call. She'd stayed with the 101st but kept in touch. Lighter, somehow. I'm doing the work I was trained for, I said. With people who value it. Things are getting weird here, she said carefully. After you left. Weird how? She hesitated. I probably shouldn't say over unsecured channels. But, let's just say Major Callahan's intuitive grasp isn't translating to functional intelligence analysis. I told her to take care of herself and ended the call. What happened at the 101st wasn't my concern anymore. But the messages kept coming. 11 days after I left, Sergeant Okonkwo, one of my former senior analysts, sent a brief message. 3 people submitted transfer requests this week. Morale is in the basement. 18 days after I left, Lieutenant Hayes reported that Major Callahan had missed a critical threat indicator in a routine border surveillance report. Nothing catastrophic yet, but it was the kind of thing you would have caught in 30 seconds. 22 days after I left, I heard through the informal intelligence network that General Voss's next major operation, a coordinated patrol sweep through the coast region, was being planned using Callahan's terrain assessments. The same coast region I'd spent 2 months mapping in detail before my departure. I didn't reach out. I didn't offer warnings or advice. I'd given the 101st 8 years of my best work. They'd decided they didn't need it. 26 days after I left, the patrol walked into an ambush. The official reports came through military channels first, sanitized and clinical in the language of Army Casualty Reporting Procedures, TIC, troops in contact, in Khost Province, grid November Delta 387452. 12 soldiers wounded by small arms fire and RPG fragmentation, 3 critically. Medevac complete. No fatalities. The engagement had lasted 17 minutes. Our patrol, 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company, 1-506th Infantry, had walked into a narrow pass with limited egress routes, a terrain feature designated on military maps as a Type 3 mobility corridor, which meant tracked vehicles could pass but with significant restriction. Insurgent forces had positioned on elevated terrain to the north and south, creating a classic L-shaped ambush with interlocking fields of fire. The kind of tactical setup I'd warned about in literally dozens of previous assessments. The kind of terrain configuration that's taught in basic infantry tactics as what never to enter without reconnaissance and overwatch. The 3 critically wounded soldiers had been hit in the initial contact, shrapnel wounds to the torso and extremities requiring immediate surgical intervention. They were evacuated by 101st Combat Aviation Brigade Blackhawks to the Roll 3 trauma facility at Bagram within 40 minutes of the contact, where surgeons worked through the night to stabilize them. All 3 survived, though one lost significant function in his left arm and another would need multiple reconstructive surgeries. The unofficial version came from Lieutenant Hayes in a voice message that sounded hollow with exhaustion. They used the route Callahan approved in his terrain analysis brief. He said the elevated approach through the pass was secure because the enemy doesn't typically position in terrain that exposed, preferring to operate from covered positions in village areas. Captain, sorry, Major, you wrote a whole briefing last year, 17 pages with thermal imagery examples, about how insurgent tactics in this specific region exploit that exact assumption. They deliberately position in exposed terrain because they know our doctrine assumes they won't. They accept the exposure because the fields of fire are perfect and they can egress through goat trails our maps don't even show. Callahan never read your briefing. Or he read it and didn't understand it. Or he understood it and decided his 8 months of experience trumped your documented analysis. 3 men are in critical condition because we walked into something you would have seen coming from orbit. The route was textbook ambush terrain, limited maneuver space, elevation advantages for attackers, natural choke point that funneled the patrol into a kill zone maybe 60 meters wide. I pulled your old reports after the fact. You'd marked that specific pass with a red extreme risk designation and recommended it never be used without dedicated ISR coverage and air weapons team overwatch. Callahan's brief didn't even mention your previous analysis. Just said the route was assessed as moderate risk with acceptable force protection measures. I listened to that message twice, sitting in my office at Bagram. I felt a sharp twist of grief for the wounded soldiers, men who trusted their leadership to keep them as safe as war allows. But I felt no guilt. I tried to build systems that would survive my absence. General Voss had dismantled them in favor of someone who sounded confident in briefings. The ambush triggered immediate fallout. Division Command launched an investigation. Within days, 4 more intelligence analysts from my former team submitted transfer requests. The official reason was always professional development, but the subtext was clear: they didn't trust Major Callahan to keep them alive, and they didn't trust General Voss to care. By the end of the 2nd week, 6 of my former 12 analysts were gone or leaving. The 101 SD's Intelligence Division, once among the most effective in theater, started missing threat assessments, filing late reports, and requesting extensions on critical briefings. Operations that should have taken hours stretched into days. Division Command started asking questions. General Voss tried to stop the hemorrhaging. She approved emergency promotions, increased leave allowances, promised better resources. None of it addressed the actual problem. She'd built her intelligence operation around one person's competence, taken that competence for granted, and then driven it away. I watched from Bagram, receiving updates through the military's informal gossip network with the detachment of someone reading about a natural disaster in a distant country. Inevitable. Impersonal. Entirely predictable. The call came 7 weeks after I'd left. My phone showed an unfamiliar number with a military exchange. I almost didn't answer. Major Reeves. General Voss's voice was clipped, controlled, but I could hear the fracture lines underneath. We need to discuss your potential return to the 101st. I let the silence stretch for 3 seconds. I'm not interested in returning, ma'am. The division is experiencing significant operational challenges. Your expertise would be invaluable in restoring intelligence capabilities. You removed me from intelligence review because Major Callahan read terrain better than I did, I said quietly. Presumably he's still providing that superior analysis. Another pause. Major Callahan has been reassigned to logistics coordination. The position of Chief Intelligence Officer is available. It comes with a promotion to Lieutenant Colonel and full authority over division intelligence operations. Everything she'd denied me for 2 years, suddenly on the table. I should have felt vindicated. Triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. General, I appreciate the offer. But I've built a team here that depends on me. Colonel Whitmore has given me responsibility and trust from day one. I won't abandon that. Reeves. Her voice shifted, losing its command polish. The division needs you. We have operations planned that require someone with your capabilities. You had someone with my capabilities. You decided you didn't need her. I kept my tone professional, almost gentle. Ma'am, I wish you and the 101st well. But my answer is no. I ended the call and sat looking at my hands. They weren't shaking. I felt calm in a way I hadn't in years. General Voss tried twice more over the next week, emails with increasingly generous offers, a formal request routed through Colonel Whitmore asking him to release me. Whitmore forwarded that one to me with a single line, "Your call, Major. But I'd rather keep you." I stayed at Bagram. The investigation into the cost ambush concluded 3 months after I'd left the 101st. The official findings, distributed through command channels, were devastating in their bureaucratic precision. Failure of intelligence assessment due to inadequate terrain analysis and insufficient review protocols. The report detailed how Major Callahan had approved a patrol route through a known insurgent operating area without properly evaluating choke points, elevation advantages, or historical attack patterns. It noted the recent disruption in division intelligence personnel had created gaps in institutional knowledge. It recommended immediate reconstitution of intelligence review boards and enhanced training protocols. What the report didn't say directly, but everyone who read it understood, was that General Voss had dismantled a functioning system for cosmetic reasons and paid for it with wounded soldiers. The theater command removed her from division leadership. She was reassigned to a staff position in Germany, the kind of lateral move that ends careers. The official language was diplomatic, routine rotation. Everyone knew what it meant. Major Callahan received a formal reprimand and was permanently barred from intelligence billets. Last I heard, he was managing supply chains at a forward operating base, work he was actually qualified for. The 101st brought in a new commander, Colonel Fraser, who'd built her reputation on operational competence rather than political networking. One of her first acts was requesting my consultation on rebuilding the division's intelligence protocols. I spent 2 weeks at their base, training new analysts and documenting the systems I'd developed. Colonel Fraser listened to every briefing, asked sharp questions, and implemented every recommendation. You could come back permanently, she offered on my last day there. The division needs someone with your skills. The division has Lieutenant Hayes, I said. She's ready. She just needs leadership that won't waste her. Fraser studied me for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But the offer stands if you change your mind. I returned to Bagram, to work that challenged me and leadership that respected me. My team had expanded to 8 analysts. We were building threat assessment models that would become standard across multiple commands. Colonel Whitmore made sure my name was on every briefing, every innovation, every success. 6 months after the ambush, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. At the ceremony, Whitmore said something that stayed with me: some leaders build empires. The best ones build people. You've done both. Here's what I learned from 8 years of invisible competence and 3 months of watching consequences cascade. Loyalty isn't noble when it's one-directional. I'd spent years believing that dedication would eventually be recognized, that patience was a virtue, that good work created its own reward. But patience becomes complicity when you're enabling someone else's negligence. Loyalty becomes self-destruction when the person you're loyal to doesn't value what you provide. The organizations that tell you you're irreplaceable but act like you're invisible aren't confused. They've simply found someone willing to work for less recognition than they're worth. The moment you accept that arrangement, you teach them it's acceptable. Your departure won't destroy a well-built system. It will only destroy systems held together by your personal effort, and those systems were already broken. I didn't sabotage the 101st by leaving. I revealed structural failures that General Voss had been hiding behind my competence. Revenge doesn't require schemes or confrontations. Sometimes it's just walking away and letting reality present its invoice. I didn't orchestrate the 101SD's intelligence collapse. I simply stopped preventing it. The question isn't whether you're good at your job. You probably are. The question is whether the people evaluating your work understand what you do well enough to value it. If they can't distinguish expertise from competence, if they reward performance art over actual performance, you're not in a meritocracy. You're in theater.